Greetings from St Mary's Bairnsdale. I greet especially our parishioners of the churches of East Gippsland and all the dads on this Father's Day. To all the fathers, grandfathers, stepfathers, all father figures of children in East Gippsland. In the novel, The Great Hunger, the story is told of a man who moves into a small farming community. The neighbours are friendly towards the man, but he rejects them and puts signs around his property: no trespassing. One day, a little girl from one of the neighbouring farms crawled underneath a fence to play with one of the man's dogs. The dog became aggressive and mauled her. The attack proved to be fatal. Hostility towards the new farmer in the district spread quickly. When the man came into town, no one would speak to him. Shop assistants refused to serve him, and merchants refused to sell him seed for spring planting. All hostility and resentment towards the man ended after the father of the girl who was killed went over to the man's farm and started sowing his fields. This act of kindness was too much for the hard-hearted newcomer. Rather than tell him to leave his property, he asked the father of the girl, "Why you, of all people?" The father responded, "To keep God alive in my heart." When someone hurts us, we are not commanded to forget, but we are commanded to forgive. I put it to you that we cannot forget. Our memory won't allow it, and the scars are a constant reminder of the wound. But we can forgive, which has the effect of keeping God alive in our hearts. The question then is how to forgive, especially the most despicable of crimes. Jesus instructs his disciples about a four-step process. Firstly, when someone wrongs us, the challenge is to make up with them. Part of that challenge is to speak with them directly, not speak about them behind their backs. Secondly, if the matter is still unresolved, Jesus urges the seeking of mediation by one or two others. Thirdly, failing mediation, the community convenes to bring about a just resolution. Finally, if the person who has committed the offence still refuses to accept responsibility, Jesus tells us to treat them as though they don't belong to that community. However, being the Good Shepherd, Jesus knows these sheep do belong according to God's plan. But their choices have led them to be outside the boundaries of what defines that community. Importantly, they are free to be there. What kind of freedom is it, though? All of us have been wounded by conflict in relationships. Like physical wounds, these wounds can become infected if they remain untreated. We can become bitter and resentful, losing faith in others, ourselves, and in God. Just like the newcomer in the story, whose hard heart had been softened by a man who chose not to allow his anger over his daughter's death to leave him bitter and resentful. Isn't it true that we gain so much when we give of ourselves, reaching out, even when we're hurting? Jesus wants us to hold out the olive branch to those who have hurt us. If they refuse to accept, we walk away, not with heavy hearts, but with a freedom that is implicit in giving. without counting the cost. And we can give because we have received. This is the answer to our question, how can I forgive? We have received the fullness of God's mercy in the saving action of Christ. The people who are most able to give the gift of forgiveness are those who are conscious of having received it. Such people are not burdened by anger, bitterness, and resentment. They are model Christians for our world, truly free. If we allow resentment and bitterness to stay within us, the sweet Spirit of God becomes a fading force and we slowly die a spiritual death. If we allow our hearts to be hard because of pride, then God cannot stay alive in our hearts. And if God is not alive in our hearts, we have only a material life to live. The pursuit of pleasure and possessions becomes paramount. This pursuit is ultimately futile because our sensual appetites are never fully satisfied. The pursuit is a flawed grasp for happiness. This is the way of the world. It is not the way of God and his kingdom. The message is to forgive as we have been forgiven, lest the wound within us become so infected with bitterness and resentment that we carry it with us to our grave. Finally then, on this Father's Day, may the Father in this story inspire us to let God heal the wounds in our hearts. Jesus wants to heal our hearts from all bitterness and resentment by healing the wounds that opened up when someone sinned against us. Forgiveness is our world's great hunger. When we sin against others, Jesus waits for us to turn to him in the gift of forgiveness in sacramental reconciliation. And after we have received this gift, then, and only then, can we give that gift to others. Jesus came to set us free, to deliver us from the slavery of sin, to liberate us. Until we surrender the wounds that bind our hearts, we will continue to choke ourselves to a spiritual death. God's forgiveness allows us to keep him alive in our hearts, and with God alive in our hearts, nothing and no one can take away that life from us.